Hi everyone, welcome back to our Accuracy Flight Test Series videos. Chris from ProFlight Trainer. This video will cover Flight Simulator Steam Edition with pre-installed Jet Ranger, chapters 2 to 5. We're now looking at chapter 2, Cockpit. Couple tests, starting with 2.1 3D Cockpit. We want to compare against the real machine. Instrument layout, where the stuff is put. This is a pretty good replica of the original thing, but very important things like boost pump, circuit breakers that you need to pull out, pull in every time, or the placement of battery and generator buttons, as well as hydraulic buttons, things like that are missing, and the warning light panel looks pretty bad. There's no test light. There's a couple things missing. Overall, for the readability perspective, everything looks pretty good and it's pretty good readable from many different angles, even like now when some sun is glaring into the cockpit. So that seems pretty good. Button features and animation. There are a couple buttons that will work, like the full shut off. Is that very realistic? I don't think so. The starter button, for example, doesn't work. There's a couple of lights that are placed correctly. For some reason, they have a avionic master switch and GPS switch, strobe lights, things like that. A couple lights, mostly lights which we don't really need to focus too heavily on. And some other important switch like the hydraulic switch are missing. So some buttons and features are here and some are missing. Again, from a readability perspective, if we take different angle, I can also move a bit around here and see. I think this is pretty well done. Everything is readable from any perspective. I can go lower or go up and down, forward, backwards. Everything looks good. The big advantage of the 3D cockpit in FSX being fully 3D, so you can actually go from any point of view and look at your cockpit, and that's pretty good. Looking good to me. There's no other special view available, just the standard view, radio check, 2D cockpit for instrument work, and then the 3D virtual cockpit. From an outside perspective, everything is pretty normal. Not much here that is very useful to us. It would have been nice to have, for example, standard views for approach, looking at down through the glasses to the pedals, and then maybe being able to open the window and then look down, check your skids. After landing confined area, you want to see where your skids are. Things like that are missing. So not a very good environment if you want to practice habits and get good habits. That closes our section 2. And next will be chapter 3, systems. We are at chapter 3, systems. 3.1 procedural startup and shutdowns. Well, startup cannot really be performed because the starter button, for instance, doesn't work. The throttle works, but there is no idle release spring, and the circuit breakers panel don't allow for full pumps to be depressed and things like that. So the startup cannot really be accomplished, and the shutdown, actually you'll have probably to shut off the fuel gauge, which you wouldn't do in the real machine. You would use the idle D10 to fully close fuel control and shut down the engine and things like that. So startup and shutdown cannot be done according to the real machine. The next we want to see is special emergency procedures. Is there some sort of hydraulic failure simulation? Anything special that you could be useful? Smoke in the cockpit, things that you would do on the real machine. Absolutely nothing has been replicated here. This add-on, this pre-installed Bell Jet Ranger from Microsoft, had none of those special features done, just the bare minimum. And I believe Microsoft did it on purpose for most pilots to just enjoy introduction to helicopter flight. But if you want to prepare for a real Jet Ranger transitional training, it won't be helpful at all. So the next we're going to move into simulated emergency, starting with a straight-in auto-rotation and then a 360 auto-rotation, and we're going to monitor rate of descent, control position. So I'll go ahead, make a bit of a fast takeoff here. You'll apologize the brute way to fly, but just for the sake of getting ready for a straight-in auto-rotation. I'm just gonna accelerate a bit. We are already crossing 2,000 feet. 2,500 would be plenty. I'm just gonna accelerate a bit. And now I'm gonna close throttle. Collective down. Keeping the RPM. There is a very unrealistic rotor RPM relation to collective. I can raise collective for a lot, and then all of a sudden the rotor RPM starts to wiggle. I'm not exactly sure what it's doing. And I mean, I have the collective full down and I'm still gliding like I would be almost on a glider. That's very unrealistic. Let's see what happened as I try to flare. There's absolutely no RPM change, nothing, and then all of a sudden I crash. Kind of crash. I can reopen the full RPM. I'm gonna do another one. This time I'm gonna go a little bit higher. And we're gonna see if we can do turns. As far as I can judge from what I've seen so far, extremely unrealistic behavior. First, the rotor RPM isn't really fluctuating much with the control input I'm giving. Secondly, my glide path was like way too good. The Jet Ranger is known to have a very good glide path, mostly due to the heavy design of its two main rotor blades, which give him a big advantage over other small helicopters with very light blades. But still, I would not have a glide ratio of like 5:1 or something like that. So that's good. Okay. Speed is a bit fast here. See if we can handle the turn. The rate of descent is fine, I would say. Close to what you would probably expect. Speed is still too fast. It's looking good so far. And then flare. And put it down. And that's the issue with the last part of the flare. Since the RPM aren't really simulated, it seems the RPM aren't really simulated at all, then you don't see any real flare action. You can't use your RPM. The last power that you have remained contained in the rotor blade should be there to keep you from falling out of the sky and just shut down like in a normal auto rotation, but this doesn't work at all. So very bad simulation of auto rotation here, probably mostly due to Flight Simulator X, not necessarily the Jet Ranger, the pre-installed Jet Ranger itself. Next is hover auto rotation, so I'm just gonna go in hover. There comes the RPM, back to hover, couple feet off the ground, like this, and then I'm gonna close throttle and compensate with collective. So it one more time. So in the real machine, you would have a nose tendency, of course, because you're losing thrust from the rotor and from the tail rotor, and then you would have a side tendency that's due to the mast construction by design, and then you would have time to compensate and land. Especially true for the Jet Ranger with the heavy blade. Again, it's the same advantage from the two heavy blade design. So let's see, let's do a couple feet higher this time. In 3, 2, 1. As you could see, first, there was absolutely no nose tendency. Secondly, there was no side tendency. And thirdly, there was absolutely no RPM management whatsoever. The RPM just drops, and if you don't have any forward speed, then you fall down the sky like you wouldn't be a helicopter, but maybe a glider. Next thing we want to test is a blocked pedal simulation. So for that, I'm just gonna pick up some speed, and then since the power pedal is on the left side, we're gonna simulate a stuck power pedal like that. There you go. I should be able to still continue flying if I keep speed. Let me go back to a standard speed here. There you go. So now I have my feet off pedal. And first what I would need to see is there a speed without climbing or descending which would permit landing. So I'm just gonna decelerate slowly, see if the nose is coming straight. But my nose is going all the way to the left. And if I reaccelerate, my nose should come back. But the nose stays where it is, so there seems to be not much dynamic stability with speed. Let me see if I can decelerate or straight and shallow approach. So in this case, the nose actually should be much further left because I have all the speed that I need. And then it should actually fly stable flat, and then at the end, just before the nose starts to turn more, I could put it down. But this guy here doesn't give me any aerodynamic stability. Even if I increase speed, my nose tendency remains the exact same. I'm gonna change side for the pedal, see what happens with left pedal stuck in position. Should be actually much easier to land like that. Let's go back to a field, and then we want to have a shallow approach. This emergency, by the way, can feel a bit weird when you start doing it, but it's actually quite some fun to fly sideways. So we will have a shallow approach, a very little descent, and as we go closer and closer to the ground, we should be able to bring the nose back to the right just before pulling it down and sliding. But the thing is, the nose never ever went to the left and to the right, and that is mainly due to the lack of torque, induced torque simulation, partly because of Flight Simulator X doesn't really properly simulate it, but also the add-on itself isn't programmed to do so. So blocked pedals are not really doable, and I have found no other special failure or emergency simulation that can be used for this. Overall, I could add points if the add-on would have been programmed for special learning curve, special features, key combination, camera view that would help me to learn to fly. There's no such thing. Adjustable difficulty. There is no adjustable difficulty. Everything is the same. You cannot really go on a scale and train yourself to do a little thing and then add difficulty as you learn to hover. Everything is pretty standard. And that closes down our chapter 3. Next will be chapter 4, user manuals. We are looking into chapter 4, user manual, setup and introduction. The manufacturer should actually give you hints about the aircraft itself, especially when it's an payware add-on. You should get more instruction on startup procedures and instructional on how to start to fly the machine. All you would get here that I found was on the kneeboard, the checklists with a couple of reference for takeoff, in-flight operation, descent and landing, things like that. But I mean, for example here, descent and landing, power turbine set to 97, 100%. I never had any fluctuation anyway, so I don't see really the point. I think this was just done because they needed something. They had it for the airplane, and they said, okay, let's put a couple points in for the Jet Ranger, how to hide a radio, how to hide a collective, etc. But this is not really useful for someone that wants to learn to fly the Jet Ranger. There is no in-depth instruction, manuals or anything like that. Now we can also add points if there would be special attention given to details like calibration or settings procedures, different operating system, maybe special video guides on how to start up and things like that. Again, this is a pre-installed aircraft. There's nothing like that available. You might find help on forums and YouTube channels, but there's nothing that comes with the simulator itself. No point here. We're looking at setting explanation. Is there recommendation coming on how to adjust the settings? Here we're talking about control settings, sensitivity, null zone, control axis, buttons, and key. Is there any hint, any explanation what you should do? There's absolutely nothing here. So again, pretty low standard for that. And that closes down our chapter 4. Next will be chapter 5, others. We're looking at chapter 5, others. These points are usually attributed without special guidance, just with common sense, and there will be a low point scoring out of it, but still can have some little inputs that can help on decision making when you select a helicopter for your personal training session. So the first one is looking at costs. This one is pre-installed with the simulator, so the cost is not relevant. it's included. There's no cost for it. Performance impact. I was looking at frame rates for the pre-installed Jet Ranger. It was pretty good. I never had any issue of the frame rate dropping or anything like that. And the paint library, I don't think there's hundreds different paint library for that specific aircraft. There's those are the one. I don't think it adds a lot of value. It would have been nice to have one on to land underwater or with open doors and configuration like that, just to help for training scenery when you see more outside the door, or you can actually train yourself to fly without doors, things like that. Checklist, we talked about the checklist before. There's a couple of checklists here, but they're not close at all to the real thing, and they don't add any value to it. In regard to external view, there are the standard external view that you get, but they don't give you close view under the panels and things like that that you could use for a pre-flight to train yourself and get habits through pre-flight. The sound, the starting sound, the shutdown sound are not close to the real one. There's a couple of bottom sound that you hear, but especially for RPM and engine sound and blade sound that could be helpful while flying and doing approach. There is really not much hint. There is this double sound, like this high pitch and this low pitch, just give you a hint about your collective input, which is weird because sound should not be based on your collective input, but what the blades really are doing, the flight attitude you have, and your blade RPM and engine, not your collective setting. So the sound are actually quite bad. The graphic effects, I was trying to put the helicopter in the wind here, and as you lift you can see sort of the downwash effect. The helicopter wants to lift off right away because I've put a lot of wind effects, about 40 knots wind, and you can see the downwash gives an indication of where you actually are, and it helps you to locate the wind. Now if you do the same, 90° off the wind angle like this, first off I would be pushed into the ground just because of side wind, and that's kind of weird. Secondly, I wouldn't see much difference in the downwash effect, and I would not be able to use the downwash effect to tell where the wind comes from. So that's kind of useless. As soon as I would point the noise into the wind, I would climb like crazy, and that's another bad point because that's not what happened. Bad wind would just push you sideways or something like that, but you will not climb or descend just by pointing the noise into it. It's not like an airplane. The helicopter have a carrying main rotor blade that will perform better if you fly into the wind, and you will use less tail rotor, mainly due to the airflow going on airframe and giving you stabilization, but it doesn't it doesn't make you climb right away. So that's pretty unrealistic. And there's no other special features that I found. So that closes our chapter 5 and the second part of the test. So here come the detailed results for the accuracy flight test. Flight dynamic don't do very well, not too surprised, but still worth mentioning, slope landings and torque readings are pretty accurate. Special equipment, there's not much to say there. From a cockpit perspective, it's not too bad, but there's so many buttons and things, important things, that are not modeled accurately that it cuts with a very low score. From a procedural point of view, would be a very bad choice to train on that machine if you plan to fly on a real jet ranger. Most procedures are totally absent and inaccurate. Flight manual, there is no flight manual, so no points. The only good thing about the others category is the cost. It comes pre-installed, so it's free. There is absolutely no frame rate impact, and that's it. The quick overview of the results. The flight dynamic, which is by far the most important, and that's why it makes more than half the points, is a disaster. Mostly due to the lack of induced torque or tail rotor effect or nose effect or how you want to call it. This is a huge problem, and we would never recommend this add-on to train to prepare yourself for the real thing, because you will lack a lot of control coordination. The cockpit somehow accurate, but a lot of button missing, a lot of procedures missing. That's why the system scores 0 point. There is no manual, no huge help to set up and practice, and a little bit of points because the helicopter comes pre-installed, thus free, no additional cost to get it, and the frame rate hit is really good. There's absolutely no frame rate loss. Overall, a score of 197 points, and we will see when we start to review payware like the DodoSim or Dreamfall in X-Plane and other reference good high quality model that this score is much too low to recommend it for serious training.